The night Eleanor Parker was publicly ruined, the music did not stop. Crystal chandeliers flooded the Ashford Grand Hall with golden light, reflecting off silk gowns and polished shoes as Boston society filled the room with laughter and polite applause. It was April of 1891, and for Eleanor, only 17 years old, this was meant to be the most important night of her young life. Her debut. Her first step into the world she had been trained for since childhood. She stood near the edge of the dance floor, hands folded tightly in her white gloves, trying to slow the uneasy pounding of her heart. To anyone watching, she appeared calm, even graceful. But inside, fear twisted through her chest. Every movement felt watched. Every breath felt judged. Her curls refused to stay in place no matter how carefully her maid had pinned them. Her smile trembled when gentlemen approached. Words escaped her at the exact moment she needed them most. She had danced twice already. Once with her cousin, who had been kind but distracted. Once with the second son of a shipping baron, who had stepped on her hem and apologized more to the floor than to her. Now she waited again. Waiting was the hardest part. The hope that someone might ask. The fear that no one would. Across the ballroom stood a man who needed no introduction. Nathaniel Crowe, Duke of Ashford. At 25, he was already spoken of as one of the most powerful men on the East Coast. Old money, railroad investments, political connections. His presence alone commanded attention. Tall, dark-haired, sharp-eyed, he stood slightly apart from the crowd, observing rather than participating. He did not smile. His face held a calm so cold it unsettled those who met his gaze. Women whispered his name with longing. Mothers watched him like generals eyeing a prize. Eleanor noticed him the moment she entered the room. She did not know why her heart fluttered when she saw him. She only knew that something about his stillness drew her attention. She watched the line of his jaw, the way his eyes moved over the room with careful distance. For a foolish few minutes she imagined that when his gaze briefly met hers, something passed between them. Recognition, interest, something more. She scolded herself for such thoughts. Novels filled girls with nonsense. Men like him did not notice girls like her. Then her father began walking toward the Duke. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Her father, Henry Parker, moved with purpose through the crowd. Smiling too widely, speaking too eagerly to those he passed. Eleanor watched in frozen horror as he stopped before the Duke and began speaking. She could not hear the words, but she recognized the tone. The tone he used when discussing business, when arranging futures. The Duke listened without expression. Then both men turned and looked directly at her. The room seemed to narrow as her father beckoned her forward. Eleanor crossed the ballroom as if in a dream, her slippers barely touching the floor. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure others could hear it. Her father's hand on her arm felt heavy, not comforting. "Your Grace," her father said cheerfully, "may I present my eldest daughter, Miss Eleanor Parker? I believe she would make a fine match for a gentleman of your standing." The Duke looked at her, truly looked at her. For 3 long seconds, Eleanor dared to hope she had been wrong about him, that there was warmth behind his eyes, curiosity, something kind. Then he spoke. "I find Miss Parker entirely unsuitable," he said clearly. "She lacks grace, substance, and the temperament required of a duchess. I suggest you aim lower ambitions for your daughter." Silence crashed over the room. The words struck Eleanor like blows. Each one landed deep, knocking the breath from her chest. Faces turned. Whispers sparked. She felt every eye on her, felt her shame exposed and shared. Her father stammered something in protest, but Eleanor could no longer hear him. The world felt distant, muffled, unreal. The Duke had already turned away. Something broke inside her. She curtsied out of habit, not knowing why, then turned and walked toward the exit with all the strength she had left. She did not run. She refused to run. Her mother appeared at her side, silent but stiff with embarrassment. Together they left the hall as the music resumed behind them, louder now, as if nothing had happened. The carriage ride home passed in silence. Rain tapped against the roof. Eleanor's tears fell steadily into her lap. Unsuitable, the word echoed in her mind like a curse. She did not know that several streets away, Nathaniel Crowe stood alone in his study, staring out a rain-streaked window, his hands clenched so tightly they shook. The weeks that followed were worse than the night itself. The story spread through Boston with eager speed. Drawing rooms buzzed with retellings of her humiliation. Some pitied her, others enjoyed it. Eleanor attended fewer events. When she did, she felt invisible. Smiles came too easily. Conversations ended too quickly. Her mother spoke to her less, disappointment heavy in the silence. Her father buried himself in work, avoiding her eyes. Only her younger sister Clara slipped into her room at night to hold her while she cried. "I am unfit," Eleanor began telling herself each morning in the mirror. "I am lacking. I am not enough." After a month, she stopped attending society altogether. It was Clara who suggested leaving the city. The family owned a quiet estate outside Concord, Massachusetts, a place of trees and fields and silence. Eleanor clung to the idea like a lifeline. Her parents agreed too quickly. By early summer, Eleanor was gone. The countryside saved her. Away from the judgment of society, Eleanor slowly rebuilt herself. She found purpose in managing the tenant cottages. She opened a small schoolhouse for local children. She read endlessly: history, philosophy, politics. She discovered she was capable, strong, useful. At 20, she was no longer the frightened girl of the ballroom. Yet one name never fully left her thoughts: Nathaniel Crowe. When Clara wrote from Boston and mentioned that the Duke remained unmarried, turning away every woman placed before him, Eleanor felt something stir in her chest. She told herself it meant nothing. She was content now. Then a letter arrived. Her father had arranged her engagement. Lord Samuel Hartman, 38, respectable, kind, a sensible match. Eleanor accepted, grateful but unmoved. She did not know that in a gentleman's club in Boston, Nathaniel Crowe froze when he heard her name spoken with Hartman's. Nor that before winter ended, Lord Hartman would suddenly withdraw his proposal. Nor that this would not be the last time a man vanished from her life just as hope began to grow. And she certainly did not know that the Duke who had destroyed her at 17 was watching from the shadows, determined that no man would ever claim her. Not until he did. Not yet. After Lord Hartman's sudden withdrawal, Eleanor told herself she felt nothing. She stood in the small study at the Concord estate, holding her father's letter with steady hands, reading the polite excuses that explained how Lord Hartman had discovered a different calling for his future. Business opportunities in Chicago, a change of heart, regret expressed with careful distance. Her father paced the room in anger and confusion, muttering about unreliable men and wasted arrangements. Her mother sat stiffly, lips pressed thin, already calculating how this failure would reflect upon the family. Eleanor listened in silence. Inside, something shifted. It was not heartbreak. She had not loved Hartman. It was something colder. A quiet confirmation of a belief she had begun to accept as truth. This is how it will always be. She returned to her work with renewed intensity. If marriage was not meant for her, then she would build a life that did not require it. She expanded the schoolhouse, added evening lessons for adults, organized a small lending fund for struggling families. People began to look at her with respect rather than pity. By 22, Eleanor Parker was no longer spoken of as a failed debutante, but as a capable woman with sharp intelligence and uncommon resolve. And yet, men still noticed her. The first was Thomas Caldwell. He was a lawyer from Hartford, visiting family nearby. He attended a harvest supper Eleanor organized for the village, and spent most of the evening listening rather than talking. He asked about her work. He remembered details. He returned the following week with books he thought she might enjoy. Eleanor was cautious, but she felt something gentle unfolding. They walked together through the fields. They spoke of ideas and purpose. He admired her independence rather than fearing it. For the first time since she was 17, Eleanor allowed herself to imagine something more. 3 weeks later, Caldwell received a letter. A job offer in New York. Prestigious. Immediate. He apologized deeply, promising to write. He never did. The second was Reverend James Moore. Kind, earnest, thoughtful. He spoke of building a life of service together. Eleanor considered him carefully. She did not feel passion, but she felt peace. Then came rumors, questions about her reputation, subtle warnings from unnamed sources. The Reverend withdrew politely, visibly uncomfortable. By the third time, Eleanor noticed the pattern. Every man who showed real interest disappeared just as the future began to take shape. She stopped hoping. At 23, she made a decision born of exhaustion rather than despair. She would accept the next suitable proposal without dreams or expectations. She would choose stability over longing. She would protect herself from disappointment by expecting nothing more. That was when Thomas Wickham arrived. He was the son of a wealthy industrialist from Lowell, confident, loud, proud of his success. He spoke of expansion and influence and social advancement. Eleanor did not like him, but he was eager, determined, unlikely to vanish. When he proposed after only 6 weeks, Eleanor accepted. The news traveled quickly, and in Boston, Nathaniel Crowe shattered a glass in his hand. For years, the Duke had convinced himself that he was acting for Eleanor's benefit, that he was steering unworthy men away, that he was protecting her from mediocrity. But Wickham was different. Wickham wanted her title, her family name, her usefulness as decoration. And suddenly, the lie Nathaniel had lived with cracked open. He was not protecting her. He was claiming her. The realization left him sick and restless. For 6 years, he had watched her life unfold through careful channels. Letters, reports, observations disguised as business inquiries. He knew about the school, the tenants, her quiet strength. He knew about Hartman, Caldwell, Moore. He had intervened every time. Not because they were dangerous, but because they were not him. Now, as Eleanor prepared to marry a man who would cage her spirit rather than cherish it, Nathaniel faced the truth he had avoided since that ballroom night. He loved her, and he had loved her since she was 17. 2 days after the engagement was announced, his carriage rolled toward Concord. The sight of the ducal crest outside the Parker estate caused instant chaos. Servants whispered. Her parents rushed to prepare. Eleanor felt her blood turn cold when she heard his name. She met him in the garden, her spine straight, her expression sharp. "You have no right to be here," she said. Nathaniel did not deny it. "I have every reason," he replied quietly. Their words clashed like blades. Accusations spilled from her with years of buried fury. He listened, absorbed every strike. Then she asked the question that changed everything. "What did you do?" The silence that followed told her the answer before he spoke. His confession came slowly, carefully, every manipulation laid bare, every interference exposed. Eleanor felt something inside her tear apart. "You stole my life," she said, her voice shaking. "You decided for me, again and again." "I thought I was protecting you," he said. "No," she replied, "you were protecting yourself." The rain began to fall as his defenses collapsed. For the first time, the Duke spoke not as a man of power, but as a wounded son shaped by coldness and fear. He told her of his father, of punishment for emotion, of a childhood where love was weakness. And he told her why he rejected her. Because she made him feel, and he had been taught that feeling was dangerous. Eleanor listened with tears and anger tangled together. Understanding did not erase the damage. Pain did not vanish because it was explained. But something shifted. For the first time, She saw him not as a monster, but as a broken man who had broken her in return. He asked for 6 weeks. 6 weeks to court her honestly, without manipulation, without power. She agreed. Not because she trusted him, but because she needed the truth. Those weeks changed everything. Nathaniel arrived every morning without fail. He listened more than he spoke. He supported her work without claiming credit. He treated her as an equal. He did not touch her without permission, did not pressure, did not rush. Eleanor watched him carefully, and slowly, against her will, her heart began to open. She saw him with the children, with the villagers, with her parents. She saw patience where there had once been ice, and she realized something terrifying. He was changing. By the 4th week, she knew she loved him. The realization left her trembling. Love meant risk. Love meant pain. But it also meant truth. She ended her engagement to Wickham. The Duke handled the fallout quietly. One evening, in the garden where her life had turned so many times, Nathaniel knelt before her. Not as a duke, as a man. And Eleanor Parker said yes. But peace did not come easily, because love built on wounds must still face the scars. The weeks after Eleanor accepted Nathaniel's proposal were not filled with celebration. They were filled with reckoning. Word spread quickly through Concord and Boston alike. Some spoke with wonder that the cold Duke of Ashford had chosen a woman he once humiliated. Others whispered that Eleanor had been clever, that patience had finally paid off. Eleanor ignored them all. For the first time in her life, she was not living for society's approval or fear of its judgment. She was living with open eyes. Nathaniel did not rush her. He remained careful, steady, almost restrained, as if afraid that one wrong step might undo everything they had rebuilt. Eleanor noticed this and understood it. Trust, once broken, does not return easily. Before the wedding, Eleanor insisted on something that surprised everyone. She asked Nathaniel to walk with her through the village and speak openly to the people whose lives she had shaped. Not as a duke, but as a man who intended to be her partner. Nathaniel agreed without hesitation. They visited the schoolhouse together. Eleanor watched as he stood before the children and promised continued support, not in grand speeches, but in simple words that even the youngest could understand. They visited tenant homes. He listened as families spoke. He did not offer solutions immediately. He asked questions. He learned. For Eleanor, this mattered more than any ring or title. The night before the wedding, Eleanor sat alone in her childhood room, holding the memory of her 17-year-old self. The girl who had stood trembling in a ballroom, shattered by one sentence. She whispered aloud, "You were never unfit." Tears fell, not from sadness but release. The wedding took place on a clear June morning. No grand cathedral, no excessive display. Just a small chapel near the estate, filled with people whose lives Eleanor had touched. Clara stood beside her, eyes shining with pride. Her parents watched in quiet disbelief at the strength of the woman their daughter had become. Nathaniel waited at the altar, his face pale, his hands steady only because Eleanor was walking toward him. When they spoke their vows, there were no promises of perfection, only honesty. Only effort. Only choice. "I choose you," Eleanor said clearly, "not because of your name or your power, but because you are willing to grow." Nathaniel's voice broke when he replied, "I choose you, and I will never again decide your life for you." Marriage did not erase the past. There were moments when Eleanor woke from dreams of that ballroom, moments when Nathaniel withdrew into silence without realizing it. But now, they spoke. When Eleanor felt fear, she said so. When Nathaniel felt the old coldness creeping in, he named it. They learned each other slowly, carefully, with intention. In Boston, society watched in fascination. The Duke of Ashford changed. He laughed more, listened longer, left gatherings early to return home. He spoke openly of Eleanor's work, not as charity, but as purpose. The estate transformed as well. What had once been formal and distant became warm. Children's voices echoed through halls that once held silence. The school expanded. Medical aid reached neighboring towns. Eleanor remained herself. She did not disappear into the title of Duchess. She reshaped it. 5 years passed. One autumn afternoon, Eleanor stood in the garden watching her children run along the paths. Clara, now grown, sat nearby reading. Nathaniel approached quietly and took Eleanor's hand. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked softly. Eleanor nodded. "Sometimes." "Do you wish it had never happened?" She considered the question carefully. "No," she said at last. "It broke me. But it also forced me to become someone stronger, and it forced you to change." Nathaniel swallowed. "I will spend my life making amends." Eleanor turned to him, her expression gentle but firm. "You already are." "Every day." They stood together as the sun dipped low, the past no longer a wound but a lesson. Eleanor Parker had once been declared unfit. Now she stood unbroken. Not because a duke chose her, but because she chose herself first. And that made all the difference.